cultural stone stability index is a way that we can, the triage is the word we use, to go to any kind of structure and be able to quickly, with some expert background that we have, but that anybody can do with a little training, so we can triage any existing or potential damage that can occur to the building stones of a structure. So there's a number, there's dozens of questions it asks that have a very simple ranking. If anything from like 0, it doesn't exist, no kind of damage exists, all the way up to 3, which is most severe, and no in between answers. You can't do 1.5, but 0, 1, 2, or 3. You score these over like several dozen types of questions. Here it adds up to a score. The lowest number is the least damage, and the highest number is the most damage. So a facade that you would look at, which would have a higher score, means it has a greater risk or greater damage. There's more of a threat to it. So it's in several sections. There's actually some other information. The first thing we do to get a sense of it is to look around the building and find a good site, and we're supposed to take a location, or an address, or maybe GPS coordinates or something like that, and then we're supposed to sit here and draw it. We have 15 minutes to sketch out the facade that we're looking at in this little panel here. Here's a previous one we had done. This is one of the ones in Carlentini, Sicily. This was a facade. Now you can tell I'm not a good artist. You don't have to be. This is just mainly for like a reminder of where I've been, or somebody else should be able to look at these seats and get information from it. But also, the act of drawing is a specific kind of field technique. It's like taking notes in class. It helps you commit what you're seeing. So you can just casually observe things, but if you actually sketch things out, you pick up things you notice. I'll be sketching, oh, this rock here has interesting holes in it. This one has, striations and bands in it. This has grains in it. You can look at the mortar, what the mortar looks like. So I pick out these things that I would, I'm kind of focusing attention on. And then that'll help me also, categorize things when I'm actually recording the data. Different categories on the scoring. So there's site setting, potential risks that can happen, such as from trees or from some kind of erosion outside. Then there's what they call, there's a section for small scale damages to the stone or large scale damages for the stone. They're somewhat repetitive, but they count twice if they're big or if they're small. And then the last category of scoring has to do with like rock coatings, stuff like stains or things like that can happen to the rock. Oh, and then on the back side, there's other information that aren't scored but has to do with other kinds of damage or vandalism, things like visitor impact, like there's thousands of people come here as tourists, or as we saw in Sicily, sheep grazing, right? Or graffiti, or vandalism, or air pollution, things like that. They aren't scored, but we note. So theoretically, a person who does an assessment has some training. There's a web page and kind of tutorials on what to look for. This is what I've done all my life in terms of I assess rock weathering, so I'm familiar with it, but like any citizen with some training over maybe a couple days course can be able to recognize things like that And of course, the more you do it, the more practice you get at it, and you get better at it. Ideally, we do like to do it like with, I'll do it by myself if I'm by myself, but as we did in Sicily, we had like, maybe sometimes a couple people working on it at the same time, because then you can get, this is somewhat subjective. The first category is overarching geologic features of site settings. So, are there, now each of these stones are going to be different, so this will be a little tricky. Fissures independent of stone lithification. So, things that are caused by, things are going to be causing cracks that aren't related to the stone. Those kind of like faint lines you can see in this stone, that's part of the stone. You can see faint lines there. So those are its inherent thing. What I'm looking for in this first one is something that broke the stone where it wasn't supposed to break. Well, it looks like, in a sense, every one of these is flat, isn't it? This is a flat face. So they've all been shaped. So they've all been broken off to have a kind of like a flat face. They aren't just kind of lumpy boulders sticking out. So to some extent, they've all been broken to be even. So let's see. Now, let's see. I'll figure out where to put that. Are there fissures independent of stone lithification? I'm going to say they're present, but not dominant, not obvious. Are there fissures that are dependent on lithification, such as bedding or foliation? That's foliation because there's like lines in it. So it's not overwhelming, but it's there. So I will also call that present. Score of 1. Anthropogenic fissures. Is there mortar work? Yeah, everywhere. Mortar can do things. It can expand and contract, and that'll loosen all the other stuff. So it's dominant. Are there changes in textural anomalies, such as banding or concretions? Most of these stones have some kind of like, it's minerals and chemicals that are different in the stone. So that causes differences in the stone. So those, I'd say that's probably obvious if not dominant. So I'm going to give it a score of 2. And then the rock hardness. This is where I'm going to scratch now. I know these rocks. Okay, they're all kind of silicate rocks. They're really hard. They're granite. They're sandstone. They're all made out of some kind of silica, so they're all pretty hard. I want to be careful with this because it wants me to scratch the rock with a knife blade or a penny or a fingernail. I don't mind doing a fingernail, but I'm cautious about wanting to scratch things in a conspicuous space. So do this judiciously. But I think all of these are very hard. It sounds hollow. So there are there's rock weaknesses. Some of them are fingernail scratch. The weakest ones are, so if I do the weakest one, that's a 3. But the most of them are pretty hard. I'm going to put a note here. Soft sandstone. All the others are hard silica. All right, then we look at weaknesses of the edifice, impending or future loss. So this is kind of like the potential, right? Several categories, but they're pretty easy to figure out. Now, there's a term fissure sol, which means dirt that's in the cracks. So, and dirt has clay in it. Clay shrinks and swells. If it gets wet, it can actually damage rock after a while. So in a dirty environment, is there dust accumulating in any of these little cracks or between the mortar? Maybe a little bit. It's actually pretty relatively clean. So I'm going to say it's present, but it's not dominant. That's a score of 1. Then I look for roots. Are there any tree roots or plant roots that are growing into the rock? And I don't see any here. Yep. They've taken you know, vines growing on the place, that would do it. So no roots. There are no plants growing. There's some grass. Is there any algae or anything like that? I'm gonna say 0 for plants. Looks like it's all mowed and stuff like that. All right, scaling and flanking. Future sites of centimeter to half meter size diameter. Are there future places where it could peel off? Yes, here maybe, where it looks like it's gonna flake, potentially. Yes, okay, so I think it's obvious. Is there splintering following the stone structure oblique to the stone surface? So this is the stone surface, is it going into it? Are there any cracks that penetrate, look like they penetrate? So here maybe, but it's present. I would not call it, I have to look for it, so it's not obvious. So splintering gets a 1. Is there undercutting? That could be from like construction or from water erosion or things like that. Not here, so that gets a 0. Is there weathering rind development? Now I did see a couple on the other side. Weathering rind is kind of like this, literally what it sounds like. It looks like a watermelon rind around the stone. The surface of the stone, the weathering penetrates in as the stone was cut. I saw 2 on the other side. Yeah, here. This is, see where it's orange there? This coating of the stone, this is a silica sandstone. This orange coating is called the weathering rind. So, but I had to look for it, so it's not obvious. So we'll call it present. Are there any other concerns like water flow or pollution or foot traffic? Yeah, a lot of foot traffic. Vibrations, street, you know, vibrations, things like that. So that's obvious. Okay, then, next category. Evidence of large erosion events on or around the edifice. So large things that have already happened. So anthropogenic activities that have damaged, you know, have cut into the stone somehow. So this is where you think about like later modifications and renovations. And that's something we're questioning. That may be. I'm gonna say this, possibly something gonna say it's present. Are there fissures or cracking or cracking in the rocks caused by either calcium, like from mortar, or from dust or other things that are like cause cracks in the rock? And I don't think so. The mortar doesn't look like it's fracturing the rocks itself. The mortar looks like it's pretty good shape anyhow. So I don't think so. Is there any evidence of fire? Has the building burned? We can't tell if it's been cleaned up, but I don't see any evidence of burning or vandalism like that. So no fire. Any undercutting that has damaged it? That would maybe include, we already have a category for anthropogenic, but no erosion like that, so that's 0. Other natural things like from roots or earthquakes or intersection of fractures, not really, nope. So that category is pretty good. Not much on the large damage. Evidence of small erosion events on the site. Okay, so, all right, several, multiple items here. So abrasion from plants rubbing, people leaning on, scratching, sediment transport, things like that. Not really. So not really an abrasion. Is there any anthropogenic cutting? Oh, okay, that bullet impacts or carving or chiseling or graffiti, like somebody's name. Is there any obvious or construction or just renovations, things like that? Like this doorway looks, I don't think they've cut any stones to make this doorway. Either that or it's renovated that way. Same with the windows. They had to put electronics in, floodlights in here somehow. But that looks like it's interior. They may have modified the window, maybe. I'm going to say 0 for anthropogenic cutting. There is mortar work. It's obvious. It's everywhere. So that gets a 3. Alveolization is a fancy word. Alveoli are the little air pockets in your lungs. So it looks like that, little pockets. It carves little holes into things. So the better term is honeycombed appearance. So sometimes we see that. This rock here has some pits in it. Some rocks have pits in them naturally anyways too, but this is like, these are kind of like kind of irregular wearing into this kind of rock, making little holes in it, that little pockets, little honeycombs. So this isn't very, it's not extensive, but it's certainly there, but only on that rock. Other rocks don't have it at all. Is there anyone else like that? Maybe that one. This one maybe. So I call it present, but not obvious. Is there crumbly disintegration, where grains are powdery? So it's there, but it's not common around with the rest of the rocks. I'm gonna put a 1, but I'm gonna put the weak red sandstone as a note there. A few stones only. Okay. Flaking. It's like single or multiple centimeter to a few inches in size. Places where something is flaked off, like that. Or here it looks like I think these are flakes too, but I think that's because of the shaping. They could become, well, something fell off there, so that happened. So it is not difficult to find. Some of the rocks have no problem with, some of them do. So it's obvious in this case. All right, granular disintegration, like with, it says sandstones or granite. It's when individual grains are falling apart. And that is happening some places, like here, and that soft sandstone again. So that is present, but not everywhere. So I'll give it a 1. Lithobiont pitting, rock life, things living on the rock, that lichen and moss and algae. They'll eat into the rock with their acids and things like that. This looks very clean. They're either keeping it, maybe they spray a fungicide on it to maintain it, or it's just not a very habitable rock surface. I don't see any evidence of any kind of like lichen or I should take that back. That's some algae growing on that sandstone there and here. Yeah, that's why we have a green rock. Okay, so yes, some. Is it going to cause any? Is it causing any damage? Maybe there. Maybe that's what's causing those pits there. All right, so I'll put a 1 there. Let's see, losses that are parallel to the stone structure, like peeling from the stone surface, parallel to bedding planes. So if we get bedding planes like that, or like that maybe, just the way that stone is oriented. Possibly, yes. So I'm going to put a 1, but it's not a lot. Rock coating detachment. So this is like the rock, the rusty stain, or maybe calcium stain or something like that. Has that peeled off anyway? Here's the weathering line. It peeled off this rock. So that happened there. Is there? I see this staining here, but it hasn't come off really. So it's hard to. Yeah, as far as the staining, this is actually a very good example of the pit weathering in this. What looks like a sandstone. I didn't see that before. Here's some good rock varnish here. Iron and manganese and dust mixed together. Sometimes it actually protects the rock for a while, so that may be good. So I don't see really any good detachment, rock coating detachment happening. So I'm going to put a 0. Is there rounding or blurring of carved edges? Now what they've done here, rough stone. They faced it all, or they put either a naturally occurring flat face, or they cut it themselves, but it's not dressed. Not nice square dimension stones. So this is a hard one to answer. We can't tell if there's, hard to tell a nice dimension stone with a nice right angle, or like a brick. You know, so the brick is rounding. I imagine the bricks were sharper edged at one time, but we can't tell with the rocks though. So I'm gonna put a 0. Is there any scaling? Fist size chunks of rock or larger that are falling off. This is bigger than flaking. That's flaking, but in bigger chunks coming off. Is that the size of my fist? Not really. I don't think there's any big chunks. That? No, I think that was shape. I'm going to put 0 for scaling. We already did flaking. Texture anomalies feature that erode differently, such as, you know, maybe layers in the rock, or clay, or little nodules in it that are coming out. Where did I see? Okay, so this one, I think this is helping. You know, this is actually, you know, layers in a rock. It's got iron in it, so that may be causing some. Yeah, each one of those layers has a different composition, and maybe kind of silt versus sand, silt, sand, and maybe there's some clay in there too. So that's some differentiation there. This granitic rock, so the black minerals are actually, so they're silica as well, but they tend to be weaker. They have iron in them. They'll weather out. That's what's causing some of the orange stain, like there. So that exists. Okay, so I'd say the texture anomalies are present but not obvious. Then splintering following the stone structure and oblique to the surface. So again, actual fractures that have happened going into the stone. Here, but not much else. Maybe there's one there, just it depends on the rock. I'll call it present rather than obvious, because I had to look for it. And then last, it says any other forms of incremental erosion caused by birds or insects, wasps. I don't really see anything like that. Okay, last category. Rock coatings on the edifice or facade. So is there, okay, so these are the things that either, you know, coating the rocks. Some of them have negative numbers, which mean that they add to the score, subtract from the score, making it a better score. Because sometimes rock coatings help the rock. Okay, so is there any chalk or graffiti or dust or exhaust or, you know, soot from fires? Not that I see on this one. Any carbonate? Sometimes calcium carbonate can come sometimes from mortar, and that's a frequent. You know, modern homes have this. You know, bricks and things like that. You know, the white stuff, the salts and things like that can accumulate. That salts is a separate category. Carbonates I don't see in here, so I'm going to give it a 0. Case hardening, outer shell, possibly right here. So this can be related to the weathering rind. And here, this, you know, where it fails, but until it fails, it's actually pretty protecting the rock. So it is present in a couple places. That's actually a -1 score. So it's actually helping these rocks. Oxidation, rusting on the stone surface. That's happening a lot. There. Anyway, you know, rocks that have iron minerals in them contribute oxidation. Oxidation weakens the mineral, and it's, you know, the individual minerals will start to weather, then the whole rock will weather. So that's dominant, I would say. Score of 3. Rock coatings present. Yeah, in some cases it's the rust or the dark varnish kind of stuff. So that is actually a protecting kind of coating. It's obvious, so it gets a -2. And then the last thing, salt efflorescence. You know, salts that are either sometimes coming out of the ground, sometimes it's from dust, sometimes it's from the mortar. And I don't see anything like that, so that's going to get a 0. So I would take this and then I'd take it back to the office or the research home or wherever I'm doing. I'd score it up later. I'd enter it on a spreadsheet and total it up. To finish it up, there's this last few questions. Vandalism and other issues. And so there's, things that are human issues that aren't scored, although you can score these later if you want. The category, the range of impact is anything from creates a problem to urgent danger to great danger to severe danger. There is no graffiti. I'm going to say no. Other vandalism. I'm going to say put an X. It creates a problem because it is kind of exposed here. I don't know what's happening here. I've not been counting this oven. It's a potential. So I'm going to say it could create a problem. Is there trash? A little bit. Not bad. There is some trash. It creates a problem. Visitor impact? Yes. People walking by, people taking pictures, walking on it. So it's an urgent danger that has to be managed. Land use issues, such as livestock, off-road vehicles. It could be a problem. And then any natural processes that are a major concern to you. We're pretty close to sea level here. So I imagine, we have storms here. In Sicily, we were worried about earthquakes and volcanoes and fires. So we do have both tropical and winter storms as a natural hazard. Ice accumulates, winds, trees falling on them. This could be problems. And then there's this optional part on the rock coatings, which we didn't have much. Oh, types of rock coatings. If you're into rock coatings, you would do. There's no bird droppings. There's no dust coatings. There are iron films. There is lithobionts that we're going to call algae. There is. We don't know. I don't think there's a pollution, so I'm going to say no. And there is rock varnish. Yes. And any other notes I want to put on, not that I can think of at the moment. So that takes care of the survey.